Even if we come as a child who's very telepathic, we get programmed out of our out of the trust of that telepathy. It's not that it's not there. We learn not to trust it in the society with the programming we've been given. So then when we start to really hone back in, it's a practice to redevelop that relationship with those skills and those abilities.
Welcome to Exploring the Edges. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the conversation this week. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. We're going to talk about, we're going to try to talk about week 4 of the Artist Way, and then probably we'll do some weaving into the lessons that have come in for us this week. And also, I told Christy just a minute ago before we started to bring you guys in that when we have these sort of channeled conversations, like I've been in the juice since 5:47. I woke up this morning, I was already thinking about what the conversation would be like, what we would say. I was calling in support. And Christy, you said the same for you too. And so, yeah, we'll just start at the week 4 of the Artist Way, and then we'll see where it goes.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you guys. It has been so fun.
It's so good to see you. I'm so excited about talking about this week because this was the most challenging week yet, I found.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not even sure that, I came for Jen in the middle of the week, and I'm not even sure that it was just, anger and frustration at the Artist Way, maybe.
And the astrology was a bit wild, and because we hadn't been watching it. So I don't know. I don't want to spoil it for people, but she doesn't let you read.
Yeah.
And we thought that, when was it written, in 92 or 96?
93 or something
like that. And we thought if she had written it now, she probably would say, don't go on Instagram, don't go on Facebook, don't go on social media. Scrolling is worse than reading, I feel like.
Yeah.
So we weren't doing that. We were not watching the astrology videos that we usually watch.
Yeah, because sometimes they're today there's a harsh aspect between Chiron and Mars, I just think it kind of centers us and feeling like maybe these strong emotions it just sort of centers you into feeling like maybe the emotions are a benefit. But yeah, I had a really hard time this week too, Christy.
Yeah, I actually failed yesterday. When I started getting ready for this podcast, I started reading things that I had written in the past just to kind of get, remind myself things. So I did get through about 5 days, and I didn't do a lot of reading. So I was really proud of myself for that. I really worked on using language that I have, because one of my big goals in my life is to find language for things and to be able to explain the things I think about, metaphysical type of things, with appropriate language. So I love to look for words. And so I really challenged myself every time I wanted to look for words to get out a special notebook just for my own special words and write the words that I was thinking. And I did brainstorm a lot of good stuff, especially at the beginning of the week. The last few days have been a bit tougher, though. I think the astrology maybe was more supportive in the beginning of the week. And then the end of the week, I've just really felt like I cheated a little bit. I watched a couple podcasts and
yeah. Well, Jen said to me, I think for reading for Jen is sort of just a supportive hobby. Jen actually, even for one of the artist dates, you had a reading date.
Yeah, I've been sitting with this book that my sister lent me, Braiding Sweetgrass, in September. I went and got it. I read, I think, 1 chapter and have not read since. Because, life just fills up, and I'm not typically somebody who reads in bed for, 5 minutes before I go to sleep. I like to read for a little bit, and I need to have energy to read. And so, yeah, I was at work and I lucked out and I had a long break, and I knew a long break was coming. So I brought my book. Jack made me a tea and a little snack. So I had my little apple snack. I had my book. I had my tea, and I set up this little artist date in my work day. And it was so nice. I read a couple of chapters of Braiding Sweetgrass. It was beautiful. And then 2 days later, she's like, "You're not allowed to read anymore." And I thought I just started reading again. Come on.
I was just getting into it. That's so funny about the Braiding Sweetgrass, because my sister also gave it to me, and I had started reading it and not read it. That is so one. Good. Maybe we should read it. If you like it a lot, maybe we should all have a discussion on it for one of our podcasts coming up, because is it really good?
Oh yeah, it changed my whole life.
It's so good.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find
Oh,
it like very inspiring.
Yeah,
So
but Jen,
yeah.
but Jen had said to me like her and I read very in different ways, you know, like Jen's reading sort of like for pleasure. She has her Apple snack out, whereas I feel like I spend like 12 hours a day, like just like, you know, like pouring and analyzing and like,
Or
and
go home.
so yeah, and it's different, you know, because I think Christy, this thing that you spoke into, like, you know, when I sit down to write an offering, you know, something that I'm creating. I sit down and I'm like, okay, like, how do I want to describe this? Like, you know, sacred sexuality. Like, how do I want our first instinct is to like look, like, how have other people described it? Do you know what I mean? It's our first instinct. Like, how have other people described it? What is the right language that other people have used around this? That is not it, right? It's really to pull this essence, this understanding, this embodied wisdom out in the way that's unique to you, right? Because it's your offering. And it's so important that you created time to do that because even I've felt like, you know, I'm creating all kinds of things and our first instinct is to like look and see like okay, like what's like commonly understood or how is this
Yeah.
commonly described or that language. And I think it's really interesting, Christy, that you spoke about the language also because I think some of the language in the artist way would have been challenging for me at other places of my journey. Like I think, you know, I think that Julia Cameron does a good because the artist way is about unlocking creativity through spirituality. And
Yeah.
so the first thing that she sort of has to address in the book in the first couple of pages is this idea of like how we define God or what we talk about God as. And I think she defines it as like the greatest of good or something, the greatest
the
being.
yeah, design. Hold on, I'll think of it. Orderly design.
Oh
Good,
yeah.
good order.
Good orderly design or something like that.
Some,
Like sort of like reaching into places where like a couple of years ago, I would have been so triggered by reading God in the first couple of pages that I would have put the book down, you know? And even this week, one of the tasks was to create your own artist prayer. I'm not sure if you did that task, but like that language would have been super triggering for me, even maybe even just like 2 years ago. And so I do really think that this work, the artist's way, is finding me in a time where I have sort of like dived into these topics and explored those triggers because
Mm.
I would have been so turned off by this book even just a couple.
Yeah. And I think it's good that we're talking about this right now because I think even just in editing the first podcast,
Mm,
Jack and I were talking about praying before we ate.
mm,
And it was just interesting because like I would not have considered that a prayer,
mm,
you know, and that wasn't language that I used before I knew you. When I was doing it, I was sitting down and I was trying to be present and I was trying to have gratitude for my food because I was working through like my own like food stuff. I was just trying not to eat in front of the TV, and that could be a whole other conversation. But I wouldn't have said like, oh, I pray before I eat. So I
mm,
feel like it's interesting that we're talking about it now, and maybe good for also for the listeners,
mm.
um, that there are associations that we have with words from throughout our lives, you know?
Like prayer.
Like prayer is a
Yeah.
huge one. God is a huge one. And a lot of them are religious, but not all of them are. But there are
Hmm.
things that like trigger you. And just because somebody says like I pray before I eat, it might not be,
Yeah, we're not necessarily doing like an Our Father.
yeah, it might not be what you think it is, but it's
Mm,
interesting how your brain just automatically goes to like that place.
hmm.
Whether it's like,
yes.
oh, how nice they pray, so do I, or it's just like, oh, they pray.
Yeah, I
Like
used,
there's an assumption, I feel like, that with certain words.
yeah.
I
And
think I spent most of my life in that space of using the words that came up that were religious words. I judged them automatically and it was turned off in a way that I would just turn my back on it. And now I'm trying to use those same words to unite our experiences over all religions and all capacities. And I want to just say that God was good, orderly direction. And I
Legend.
remember
Thank
it
you, Christy.
I remember it because my son and I were in a counseling appointment one time and we were talking about this, and the counselor actually used that as like a definition of God for the space. And I was so impressed with that because yeah, it makes sense scientifically and religiously. And so it is a nice common
and
language
spiritually.
to
Yeah.
use. Yeah, and
Yeah.
spiritually. Yeah.
Well, because
Good,
Yeah.
orderly direction,
yeah.
guiding us in the good space. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that week 4 was challenging for me because Yeah, the loss of having like a good base of astrology and like just having a heads up, like the guy that we watch Red Robe Astrology.
So good.
He showed up one day with like this huge cut on his face, and he's like, the full moon was wild, kids. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, he's like, I was in a trance meditation, I fell on my face, I have this, like just I think it just helps to hear that other people are like have the
Yeah.
full moon was this week. It was in Leo.
It was a big week.
It was a big
I
week.
got hit on all three sides.
Yeah, depending on where your placements are. But the other thing that I've been struggling with, Christy, and I thought yesterday when I was talking to Jen about it, that like maybe you could help me with it. I'm like really struggling with this artist date
Mm.
idea. I'm struggling with it. And I'm not sure if I'm like, how sometimes we like make up stories to help explain, like in my mind, my whole life is an artist date. You know what I mean? Like my whole life is this sort of like, and I wonder like I'm having trouble with it. I'm like, as we're doing that, like write your ideal environment, like what does it look like, and then I'm like sitting down, I've been sort of dabbling in The Sims a bit, and like when I create this house and do all the landscaping, like is that an artist date? Like when Jen and I walk on the beach, like is that an artist date? Like
Yeah, when
when
I walk Rafiki and the sun is shining through the trees and I take a picture of the trees, is that whole experience where I'm just in nature and then inspired and take a picture, is that an artist state?
yeah, like when I'm
Or
writing,
do you
when
have to
it
label it in
when
advance?
is it an artist date? I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
So because I dealt with this too, because being retired, I live like the simple living way where everything's a ritual during my day. I take time to bless my water and things like that. So for myself, what I decided to do was to only count an artist date if I was doing it by myself, if I had pre-planned it and dressed up in a way that made me feel and look confident.
Hmm.
And then I had to like do something out of the norm. So one day to go to an artist guild, and for me, that's like connecting with people. So most of mine are going to be connecting with people. However, this week I just didn't have it in me. And so what I did instead was I took my van to a lake and I parked the van and I did a little artist picture and I did dress up nice. I felt pretty confident, in that moment, had I met anybody while I was out and about. So I think I just like put some parameters for myself that made it a little unusual. So I think it's about trying to find ways to be inspired in new directions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had talked about that yesterday. I was like, I think it's about filling up the well, like as we're creating, like as Jen is doing the graphic design, as I'm writing, like it needs to be refilled. And through that process of creating, it's not necessarily like refilling the well. So I feel like I did kind of have that thread, but I wasn't thinking about like how can I fill it up, So I
Yeah.
appreciate your suggestion and also pushing me a little bit to get like
Yeah.
outside of the box. Yeah, we talk to the river every day,
Yeah.
That's that seems like a great date to
Yeah.
me.
yeah, like sometimes I just lay in the snow.
Yeah.
We watch the moonrise.
Oh yeah, we watched the moonrise. Does
Yeah,
that count? I don't
is that
know.
an artist date? I'm not sure. Because we had said like we've never actually watched a moonrise. Like we've
Oh
never
yeah.
like we went out and stood in the dark until she came over the mountains and she started to cast her light and then we saw her rise just like the sun. It was so cool.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Yeah, it comes right up right here. So I'm really
Oh,
lucky to get to see it, both the sun and the moon. I have a really good view, especially from this patio behind me. So yeah, I love that. I'm so glad you got to see that.
Yeah, because
yeah.
I never had. Like I just never had.
Yeah, I maybe seen like bits of it, but not just stand and like wait for
Yeah.
the moon to come up because yeah, I don't know, it just feels a little bit different than a sunrise or a sunset where
Yeah.
you can just where you know it's happening. The
Yeah.
moonrise is like all kinds of crazy different times. Like a sunrise is going to be around 5:45 a.m. and tomorrow it
Yeah.
might be 5:46.
Yeah.
But I feel like the moonrise really varies. And then sometimes like you don't see her at all if it's the new moon. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit like harder to capture, I think.
And extra special if you do.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's a liminal space. And the most magical moments happen in liminal times, like the in between times, spring and fall, and morning and evening, and all those in between times. So
Yeah.
it just makes it more magical when you're like giving your attention and focus and like
Yeah.
taking that container and fusing it with the intention of honoring that moment with the moon.
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
just more potent. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cold. Cold, but
Yeah,
nice.
so cool.
Yeah, you guys are brave about getting out in it. That's awesome. I do. We did a couple moonlight hikes actually on the full moon and the night after the full moon, and I haven't done that in a while. We waited till it got really dark out and let the moon guide the way and went out into the woods.
Wow.
It was nice.
Yeah, the night of the
and I
full
think
moon
that's
was
because
wild.
I couldn't read.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the whole point. Go see the moon. I don't
Honestly,
know.
Yeah, honestly, and I think like even, because I think we've scrolled like a tiny bit, but if we went from like, and we weren't scrolling a lot before, but
Yeah.
like that extra space like matters,
Yeah.
even if it's an extra half hour every day, like that's a half hour that like I could be using to help balance this being and doing this masculine feminine energy, right? Like if I dedicated that half hour every day to just dropping in or channeling or meditating, right? Instead of,
Yeah.
I do
Yes.
think it's freed up time.
So I had something come up this week, if you're ready to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, let's shift.
Sure.
So it was about conscious conversation. That's why I think it's important to talk about is
Okay.
that I was in a situation that a few weeks ago that had thrown me off vibrationally. Like it was a situation where someone was like kind of in a victim state of thinking, and someone I care about very deeply. And it was easy for me to, like, I always do my best to be like honest, truthful, and stay in my authenticity, right? But sometimes when you're faced with someone you care about so much, you want to pad the fall, right? Or you want to like make it a little bit easier. And I actually like really thought about you, Jacqueline, because you've done this for me a few times and I so appreciated it. So after, I was being a little bit hard on myself because I was thinking like I needed to take a breath and pause in that moment instead of coddling or enabling or any of that, to like find my, like to take my left hand and put it on my heart so that I could absorb that unconditional love energy, take my right hand, put it on my throat, and send some truth and honesty and kindness into the situation. I would have not had so many regrets afterwards. So what I'm really working on doing is this, being able to hold an authentic vibration to who I am at this point in my life, no matter what situation I'm in. And tomorrow I go into my first sub situation as a substitute teacher. And so I'm really going to hold on to that. And I just think that's part of a conscious conversation, is to pull ourselves back when we notice that moment where we feel a little bit of off. Like we don't always know till after why. Because I'm not saying anything like vicious or that's I notice is really like a bad thing to say. But in that moment, I get a feeling in my gut like something ain't right. And so I should just have pulled myself back in. And I was thinking about the time that I was having a friendship with someone and I was shutting the friendship doors down. And I had called Jacqueline and I had let her know what I was doing. And I thought it was funny and I thought she'd get a kick out of it. And instead, she pulled that into her center and reflected like a really an honesty that what I was telling her was that I felt like I was opening too much in this relationship. And she held me to this truth of you can never open too much. Can you, she said, can you ever really open too much? And I've held on to that ever since. And so it just makes me realize that in those moments that are uncomfortable, if we can pull ourselves back into the heart space and then speak from the heart, that's when the thing that you have to say holds on the longest for that person you're sharing with, and that they can, like, it might be a month later, but they'll be like, oh, it clicked, I get it, because it came from the heart. So I just thought I would bring that up because that was big growth for me this week, and maybe you guys have something you can share about that heart throat coherence.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking into it. I think a lot of people talk about the power of the pause. That's like a pretty common, the power of the pause. And something that we talk a lot about, even in this circle, is like, we feel like we approach a lesson, we're like, ah, we've got it. We got this. We know what this means. The power of the pause. Like, yes, we're on it. We
Yeah.
write it down. We're like, yes, we have it, you know? And then I think what, we're just brought back to this again and again, right? Like these deeper embodiments, it's so important. And Christy, I think it's a beautiful offering of your love, your commitment to come into that unconditional love, to speak from that place, to pull yourself into this channel of wanting to be love,
Mm.
because many times, like I think Sabrina Lynn from Rewilding, she talks about like little Sabrina, she's like little Sabrina hated that, or little Sabrina was triggered by this, or little Jacqueline wants to help because she's got her own shit, or little Christy, and like when we can really, and I think you spoke into it so beautifully, like coming into your heart, creating that coherence between the heart and the throat, and speaking from this place that, and a lot of times, like Jen and I have this conversation actually a lot. Jen will always say, like, because like I would say in that moment with you, Christy, that I was channeling, it wasn't me at all that was speaking. It was like this higher consciousness, this unconditional love, this frequency flowing of divine truth, like we can, and even in the last podcast, there's times that I'm speaking where I know Jacqueline's speaking, and there's times that I'm speaking that it is not Jacqueline speaking. And often Jen will be like, well, like what is channeling though, Jack? Like because you do create the lifestyle that has supported this ability to, you've created your own regulation in your nervous system. Part of that ability to channel is like your ability. And I always say, no, it is not my ability. It's the higher consciousness coming through in that moment. And so maybe this is something for us to reflect on, because I think that there's space for both. Like,
Because I agree with you in a sense, and then I disagree with you in a sense
tell
because
me.
it is your higher self, right? Except for I know there's been moments with my staff, especially my contact staff, and then I will get into a flow state. Like I don't know what it is, but I didn't know when I started flowing what it is. I think it is probably Kundalini, Holy Spirit, universal energy of creativity. And all of a sudden, I could throw tricks of things that I wasn't even thinking. And all of a sudden, I would do this thing where it'd be going around my neck, and I'd be like, what the heck? And I'd start bawling because I'd feel like, oh, it wasn't me. Something came in, and it was just, but I think that it is like Jen is saying, this co-creation of you, like prepare your body, yourself, your mind, all the parts, and then you get into that state of flow, and it all, your higher self merges with you, and it all merges together, and that's that place. And so I guess that as like bringing that coherence, I feel like that place lives in this heart center, and I guess that's what I want to bring in, is exactly what you're explaining.
Yeah,
I
and
want to channel the highest version of myself, which, yeah, yeah.
I think
But,
it's like it has a big it's unique to you, you know? Like maybe she's gonna say no,
It is
but
not though.
like somebody else could have been in that same state and not doing the same things that you were doing, Christy, or not saying the same things. You've set boundaries, you've set intentions, you're trying to
well,
bring.
and I think we're like a radio channel, right? So Jacqueline has a special vibration. So certain essence of things are going to flow through your channel, right?
I don't know. I don't know, because I sort of feel like, because we could talk about, and like sometimes we're all sitting in the same thing, the collective energy. Sometimes we're all the channels are saying the same things, right? All the channels are moving, and I follow many channels. Like everyone starts talking about the same things. And so I do feel like there's this kind of web that's woven, and I do think that however we describe the thing, Christy, whether we say that it's life force or Kundalini or God or Great Spirit or whatever we say it is, I do think it's one thing and it moves through the whole woven web.
Yeah, sure. I feel like it's the same topic, but you're saying it in a different way. The words that come out of you are not the same.
But they are not mine. They're not my
Yeah, I
words.
don't know.
They're not, they're not.
Yeah. But what Christy is saying is that like you've prepared yourself for that. And she prepared herself like I don't know that you would have been doing any of those moves, Christy, had you not like prepared yourself to be able to do them, even if you were surprised by it. I that happened to me one time. I was drumming for dance class, and I don't think I'd ever drummed that fast in my life. And the person leading the dance class, Queen, she was like, the drum was drumming you. Like the drum was playing you, but would I
That's
have
the
been able to
same.
do that if it was my first day drumming? Like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I had been learning up until that point.
Well, and
I was
I
ready to be
find,
able to do it.
would you be able to? That is the big question right now I'm thinking
Yeah.
about when it comes to quantum physics, because when we compact time, we actually can accelerate at a rate that doesn't make sense within the time constraints.
Sort of what we were
And
talking about last week when we were talking about linear time.
and I've studied like Robert Sheldrake's work, and he talks a lot about our consciousness and our memory, and those kinds of things are not held within the brain like we have thought they are in the past. That it is outside or within our auric field, but within the field, and it's like a toy box almost that you go to and you get the things out of. And so I feel that I like, let's say I want to download some quantum physics information in the past, that I've had to almost open myself up to a lot of quantum physics ideas around me and start bringing that energy in, kind of like what Jen's saying, preparing my mind, and then allow that frequency to sync me up with some of that other information that's really close to that frequency. Like I have to dial it in a little bit. And so do you
I'm
feel like
thinking,
that?
well, I'm thinking about my experience in Bali when I went to do intuitive rebirth practitioner training. And I'm in this
Okay.
sala with 30 people and 30 different expressions of medicine woman, of priestess, of all of the flavors of warrior, of all of the archetypes came online, just sprung up right from the toy box, Christy. Like the person that I was in that space was not somebody that I had been before. And it was not somebody I had prepared myself to be. And I think many of the people in that space were surprised by their truth. This is soul retrieval, it's shamanic soul retrieval. So if we talk about the toy box and sort of maybe we're saying the same things, like when you say that we're compacting, so I don't think I did get ready to be that. And maybe I did, maybe my lived experience, because I think we were talking about this, maybe we are exposed to certain things in our lived experience to prepare us for these deeper things, but I don't think I prepared in any way for that experience. I didn't even know why I was going or what it was going to be like. One of the guys in that space was like, I thought this was a scam. There wasn't any information. It was expensive, and I just knew I needed to do it, and I didn't know why I was going. And that was sort of my experience too, like I didn't prepare for that. And so I do think that I think that there's this other thing that's happening that,
Yeah.
Well, is that what is kind of what you're talking about? I can't remember what it's called in Hinduism, but it's where like the spirit is transferred through certain individuals that hold and work on their own frequency. And when you are with somebody at a different frequency, that's why they say like pick the five people that you're around the most and I'll tell you who you are, kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
It's
Yeah.
yeah.
when you expose yourself to people that resonate at such high frequencies, you can take quantum leaps in that moment, and parts of yourself just come pulling back and the remembrance is there.
Oh yeah,
So
for sure, because there was nothing taught in that space.
right, and I do think parts of ourselves are very high level ascended, be like we call them ascended, but they're not, they're right here, but they're high level beings of like a lot of love and connection and lots of experiences, and they guide beings. I always feel like we have angelic parts of ourselves that do jobs right here on earth for other things that we're not even aware of. It could be in our sleep state, or right now I could have like a part of myself going off and doing good grid work in the world or whatever it is. I think we're way more multidimensional than what we have previously understood ourselves to be.
Oh yeah, for sure, because these are the pieces that are, when we commit to this path. Maybe it's just that after you can really acknowledge and remember and embody that you are a multidimensional being with these different pieces. You know, of course, we have our human self that's present in this dimension, experiencing this dimension. And I think as you deepen your work, you start to experience yourself in different aspects, in different dimensions, having different experiences. And I think maybe just the intention of getting to know these other pieces. And Christy, like you said, being in the presence of somebody who carries these codes, you know, maybe that's just enough to unlock these other pieces. And maybe we all carry the codes,
I think we
all
do,
of
yeah.
us, and just some of us have remembered and some of us are still remembering.
And maybe
I
not.
think
Like maybe there's people who this is their first time around,
Mm.
you know?
It's interesting to think about because that's another really
That's a
interesting.
whole, yeah.
Yeah, but it is because, you know, like when I think about like even because Christy and I talk about this a lot because Christy to me feels like she comes from somewhere else originally. Like I think Christy is not necessarily like an OG Earth being the way that I feel like I'm like an OG Earth being. And so even if this is Christy's first time here on Earth in a human experience, she's still carrying these codes from many other experiences in other and maybe they're all happening now, which is the thing that we sometimes we talk about, you know, just this idea of time as a construct and we can talk about that another time in another episode, but
Yeah.
but this idea that I do think that there are different codes, right? Like we all sort of have these, and I think it's interesting when we can recognize somebody who has like similar blueprints to us, you know, or somebody like Rhiannon who's running intuitive rebirth who just carries this like Kundalini, right? Like it's the Kundalini. And it's not necessarily that Kundalini is going to turn on this code. It's connected to this code. I think Kundalini sets the stage and then everything rises from that. And whatever's rising is whatever aspect that you've sort of set your intention around.
I think we do have certain physical features that some of us are come into this world with that actually can tune us in different ways to different frequencies we need. I was just listening to something on RH negative blood and the way that there's copper instead of the iron as the main component and how that is more electromagnetic. And so, it just someone who would come in with that blood would naturally be able to sense auras and, the things within an aura better than maybe someone who has to work and like we have to hone in those skills. They
Yeah.
become better and better. Even if we come as a child who's very telepathic, we get programmed out of our out of the trust of that telepathy. It's not that it's not there. We learn not to trust it in the society with the programming we've been given. So then when we start to really hone back in, it's a practice to redevelop that relationship with those skills and those abilities.
Yeah, and
on that note, go ahead. Did you want to go ahead?
I was just thinking about epigenetics, you know, like
Yes.
we just understand so little of the complexities of the genomes and how they're capable of behaving. And so even if it's, this idea of like remembering or learning to trust, like I do think that there are changes happening in the DNA. I do think that certain things are turning off and certain things are turning on. And so I do think that there's like a physiological component of some of these experiences that people sometimes have in like a spiritual awakening or a Kundalini awakening. You know, I do think that there's changes happening even in the physical body.
I believe that as well. I feel like it's a gnosis that I have. I feel like that's an inner knowing that I've experienced that different experiences, and it's almost like hitting levels of a game and things get turned on that you weren't aware of. It's not that it wasn't there, because I can look back to being a young child and remembering those parts of myself. But then I feel like I do think that the DNA gets like re-switched back on and to higher degrees. But I also believe that when we come in when we're very young, a lot of these things are turned on, and it's through our shutting them down ourselves Like
Mhm.
we make choices in our life to choose not to follow that inner path or those threads because they feel awkward or unusual in our society. And
Yeah.
so we end up shutting
Shame.
them down, and we
Shame
can
as
turn them
a
back on. Shame. Yeah.
yeah.
Fear, shame, guilt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Mhm.
think sorry, Christy, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Please go. Yeah.
No,
Please. Sorry.
I think
Yeah.
I think sometimes like we maybe don't even shut them down like consciously ourselves. The
Mhm.
people around us do in ways that are like not necessarily like meant to be harmful in any way. Like
Mhm.
I was just watching this a little while ago, not this week on Instagram.
She's secret
But
scrolling.
I was not. No,
No reading me.
it was a while ago. Do you remember I showed you that video and it was a dad trying to like comfort his son because his son saw like a kid
Mm.
and there was like no boy, quote unquote, no boy there. And his son was like maybe 2 and talking about like this kid and the dad's like filming the son. He's like, "Oh no, it's okay." And then like talking secretly to the camera like, "I'm so freaked out right now." And he's like, "See, nobody's here. There's nothing here. There's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing is here." But like maybe this kid was genuinely seeing spirit or a ghost or whatever.
Energy.
Energy or this boy, he kept talking about a boy being there. And the dad was trying to do what he thought was best was to not like bring fear to that, which I think like that part is good, but never once acknowledged like, oh yeah, like I don't see him, but that doesn't mean he's not there. But I don't think that he's here to hurt you. Do you feel scared or having those conversations?
Mm-hmm.
So I think even that, it's just like, then if you see it, you're going to question if it's real or not because someone of authority who's a caregiver has told you that it's not real, even if it's from a loving place. You know what I mean?
This is what I know though about you, Jen, is that this is part of your coding. These are the codes that you are bringing, because I think that you remember being in a community, in a tribe, in a setting where this is the kind of conscious conversation that was happening with kids that had different abilities. And I think it's so important to you and you embody it so well because this is like an example of what we were talking about earlier, whereas like many people would not know how to have that second conversation that you just said.
Yeah.
Like, just because I don't see him doesn't mean he's not there. And do you feel afraid? And like that level of, that's something that I don't think many people would know to say.
Yeah, and I think he was doing a good job not making his kid freaked out. And it was meant to be funny when he was talking to the camera. He's like, I've never been so scared in my life. I'm so scared right now. Oh, don't worry. See, look, he opens the door to the closet. Nobody's back here. And he's like, I'm so freaked out.
Yeah. I
Completely like
love the
it's funny, but
idea.
also, yeah, interesting to think about.
I love the idea of looking at ancestral trauma, that we call ancestral trauma, as what our ancestors needed to survive what they were going through. And so they taught their children survival in those situations. And then it became part of the habits of daily life. And it's no longer needed. And so we're just walking away from some things that now we have better, like more knowledge. We're walking in a different time. The same social constructs don't apply even from 20 years ago to now. It's very different than it was and
I feel
so
like
much
even
more free and open-minded.
2 years
And
ago.
yes, I mean, it's amazing. All right. So on that note, we should probably wrap this up for this week. Thank you so much for being here. Those of you who listened to this all the way through, we so appreciate all of you who've been here today. And we hope you feel supported in these conversations that we're having in your own development and your own journey. And that's always our intention.
Yeah, we just hope you feel a part of the conversation, that you're a part of this community. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. I'm really excited to see where it goes and to have like a big gang of us all hanging out in the comments or, wherever.
Yeah. And looking forward to week 5 of The Artist Way. Maybe I haven't read it yet, but we're still processing some anger and frustration and grief about the week 4. So we'll just see if we can kind of cleanse the palate and start fresh on week 5.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can share how that goes
Sure,
next week.
yeah. All right.
Okay, well, thanks so much everyone for listening
Thanks for
in,
joining.
and we hope that this serves.
Yeah, thanks for joining.